Good evening. Australian farnarkling received a much-needed shot in the arm with the news that Australia have eliminated Sweden in a nip and tuck affair in sub-zero temperatures at the all-weather farnarkling centre in Gothenburg earlier today, Australian time. Dave Sorensen, the Dith Pran of Australian farnarkling, was prominent throughout and set Australia up with a powerhouse display in an explosive third warble. The axiomatic Sorensen, who was cleared to play only moments before the flange was lowered, was all over the opposition until unfortunately a spring went in his knee and he lost all feeling in the hormones. Sorensen is now in doubt for the semi-final against either Scotland or Taiwan, and it'll be tragic indeed if they can't unscrew him before the weekend. A result now just in from Queensland, race 5 at the Bunga Grandon Jockey Club's meeting at Winnaheepa. 7, thank you kindly. 2, no trouble at all. And 8, failed to turn up. There will be no third dividend. Number 3 was scratched. Number 14 was very badly scratched. Number 11 was severely lacerated when he fell out of the mobile barrier, and the favourite, number 4, stayed in the mobile barrier singing Danny Boy and asking what the horses in the back room would have. Farnarkling history was made last night in Madrid when Australia confounded the experts and bundled Scotland out of an incident-packed semi-final in front of an estimated crowd. In near-perfect conditions on a beautifully prepared grommet, the Australians began well and wore the plucky Caledonians down with a combination of accurate lunging and superior fitness. Once again, the very dexterous Dave Sorensen dominated the attacking phase and after a short time was arkling from all points of the compass. Unfortunately, he suffered a spectacular mishap in the middle of the fourth warble when he dislodged a pinion in the goalpost housing and impaled himself on the southern wall. It'll be tragic indeed if he can't be prized off the facilities in time to take his place in the side for what promises to be the final against the East Germans in Moscow next weekend. Good evening. The Australian farnarklers were literally on top of the world last night following their epoch-making victory against the formidable East German farnarkling machine in a closely contested final at the People's Farnarkling Centre in light drizzle and heavy security in Moscow. The ruthlessly professional East Germans began strongly and had the Australians reeling from a series of quite obvious and very brutal personal fouls. But just after the liederkrans, it became obvious that the continually impressive Dave Sorensen had weathered the bone-crushing first warble and was prepared to take the fixture right up to the East Germans after the umlaut. The turning point came in the third warble when the oleaginous Sorensen arkled from well behind his own goal line, despite being held by both opposing fullbacks in a small ice-flattening machine he'd inadvertently backed into during a lapse in concentration. Unfortunately, only moments later, he struck an overhead light with a wet knee and short-circuited his trousers. It'll be tragic indeed if he can't be de-ionised in time to return home to what promises to be a hero's welcome in Sydney on Tuesday night. The victorious Australian farnarkling team returned home in triumph last night with the bevelled orb safe in their keeping until the challenge round begins again in late July Australian time. Team members were fulsome in their praise of the running of the championships and are approaching the government to get an arkling grommet of international standard built in Canberra so overseas teams can provide much-needed competition here during the northern summer. The heavily bandaged Dave Sorensen, who aggravated a thigh injury with a heavy fall from the aircraft while deplaning before the ramp was in position, reacted strongly to suggestions that corporate sponsorship is poised to take farnarkling into commercial television. Proposals are already with the governing body to introduce a solid program of one-day farnarkling fixtures, underlights with edited highlights between the warbles and a viewer competition tentatively called Classic Arkles. Major manufacturers have already come up with what they claim is the definitive farnarkling shoe, and T-shirts and initiatives in fast food are apparently already in the pipeline. The well-credentialed Sorensen said he would have nothing whatever to do with what he described as a ridiculous farnarkling circus, which he claimed would turn the game into some kind of joke, although he did admit that he'd been approached. It'll be very unfortunate for Arklephiles if Sorensen's assault hearing coincides with the exhibition match in Perth next Friday. Good evening. A capacity crowd was treated to a display of champagne farnarkling in an exhibition fixture run in Perth on Friday to aid world famine relief. In an all-star engagement, the victorious Australian World Championship side lined up against a composite invitation team from other farnarkling countries. The national side quickly demonstrated its total mastery of the code and pulled out every type of arkle from all parts of the grommet and seemed to have the flukum on a string, particularly when moving forward in defence. The very dexterous Dave Sorensen, who seems to set new standards every time he steps onto the sward, was in inspirational form, and the game has never had a better ambassador. He was instrumental in one almost magical arkle just before the umlaut when he notched one up from well outside the whiff and whacker by deflecting the gonad with his foot while being tackled. He was later involved in an unfortunate altercation with a section of wire netting at the southern end of the concourse, and it will be tragic indeed if he can't be disengaged in time for the Sportsman of the Year dinner, where he's the red-hot favourite to pick up the big one.
And now it's time for
Now it's time for sport.
Thank you, Geraldine. Dave Sorensen was named Sportsman of the Year at a well-attended postprandial black tie wallop in Sydney earlier this evening, Australian time. The heavily bandaged but very dignified Sorensen, the Mick Young of Australian farnarkling, was given a standing ovation as an edited sequence of some of his more spectacular arkles was projected onto a makeshift grommet positioned in the ceiling at the back of the transom housing. Unfortunately, Sorensen suffered a catastrophic personal mishap while mounting the podium to pick up the sculpted tribute. He hadn't looked well since the soup, and it was no surprise to onlookers when he fell through a rostrum interstice only seconds later while raising the golden artefact and thanking his immediate family. Organisers said that this was the first time since the function's inception that the award had been taken internally, and it will be tragic indeed if the accolade-ectomy cannot be performed in time for Sorensen to attend the launching of the Farnarkling Federation's new televised drive for popular support.
Gather round, gather on the grommet and gather on the ground. The atmosphere's electric. We're waiting for the sound to open the beginning of the first warble. First you arkle to the right, arkle up the mid-cracks, arkle all night, arkle to the all-out, arkle up the wings, arkle from the wicked whacker even though it stings. Together as a team now, arkle at the basket. Let me hear you talking, let me hear you ask it. Where is the gonad? Look for it, pass it, set up an opening, he's put it in the box!
After the lad, here we go.
Arkling the gonad to and fro. Lift that, lunge at the bevel orb, that's a classic arkle. Big Dave Sorensen stepping on the sward, arkling backwards, arkling forwards, arkling from all corners. Oh, good Lord, now that's a phenomenal arkle! Here comes Sorensen arkling at will, passing the defenders, arkling still. Look at that for poetry and symmetry and rhyme. He's a legend in his own injury time. It's in a lot of trouble.
But he's up, Mr.